Have you ever worked an entire month, watched your paycheck arrive, promised yourself this time would be different, only to realize a few days later that almost everything was already gone? Not because of a major emergency. Not because someone stole it. But because, somehow, it quietly disappeared into dozens of decisions that barely seemed important at the time. Now consider something else. What if someone handed you a raise tomorrow? Would that finally solve the problem? Or would your lifestyle simply grow until your expenses caught up with your income once again? Most people assume money changes behavior. Far less often do they ask whether behavior changes money. That difference is where today's story begins. In a busy industrial town lived a young man named Daniel. At 25, his world followed the same schedule almost every day. The alarm rang before sunrise. A rushed breakfast. A crowded bus. 10 hours inside a warehouse loading delivery trucks, organizing inventory, scanning packages, and lifting boxes that seemed to get heavier as the day wore on. When his shift finally ended, exhaustion had already made every decision for him. He wasn't avoiding hard work. Hard work was the one thing he never lacked. Yet each month ended with exactly the same feeling. I'm running as fast as I can, but I'm standing still. His apartment reflected that reality. A single room. Second-hand furniture. A refrigerator that was rarely full. An aging ceiling fan that rattled louder than it cooled. Nothing about his life looked luxurious. Still, somehow, there was never enough left over. That mystery frustrated him more than the low salary itself. Payday always arrived carrying the same promise. For a brief moment, possibility returned. The numbers inside his banking app looked comforting. Bills no longer felt threatening. The future seemed manageable. Then the messages started arriving. A new restaurant had opened downtown. Someone was celebrating a birthday. Friends planned a weekend getaway. Another pair of trendy sneakers had just been released. Daniel rarely wanted to disappoint anyone. Besides, after working so hard, didn't he deserve to enjoy himself? Each purchase felt harmless on its own. A dinner here. A subscription there. Coffee every morning. Ride-sharing instead of walking. Small upgrades that whispered the same sentence. You've earned this. None of them seemed dangerous. Together, they quietly consumed an entire month's effort. By the third week, the excitement had vanished. The refrigerator looked emptier. The bank balance looked smaller. Unexpected expenses suddenly felt enormous. He began calculating which payments could wait another few days. Then came the familiar countdown. 5 days until payday. 4. 3. Life became less about living and more about surviving until the calendar rescued him once again. The strange part wasn't that this happened once. It happened so often that it stopped feeling unusual. It simply became normal. And that's exactly what made it dangerous. Because the habits that shape our future rarely announce themselves. They disguise themselves as ordinary days. One rainy evening, Daniel ducked beneath the awning of a neighborhood cafe while waiting for the storm to pass. Inside, people laughed over warm meals. Outside, he searched every pocket hoping to find enough coins for something hot to drink. He came up short. For several quiet minutes, he watched strangers enjoying comforts that felt just beyond his reach. The rain eventually slowed. He walked home carrying nothing except a question that refused to leave him. If I'm giving almost every waking hour to my job, why does life still feel like it's slipping through my hands? That question would follow him much longer than he realized. Because sometimes a better future doesn't begin with finding the right answer. It begins with finally asking the right question. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about that question. It followed him onto the morning bus. It echoed between the warehouse shelves. It lingered while he scanned packages and stacked boxes. Nothing around him had changed. But something inside him had become restless. For the first time, he wasn't only frustrated by his paycheck. He was curious about his own decisions. That curiosity would soon collide with a moment he would never forget. A week later, Daniel took a different route home. A crowd had gathered outside a small apartment building. Voices were raised. Neighbors stood quietly, pretending not to watch while watching everything. Near the entrance sat a family surrounded by a handful of cardboard boxes. A father argued softly with the property owner. A mother tried to comfort two frightened children. No one looked angry anymore. Only exhausted. The landlord wasn't shouting. His disappointment sounded even heavier. "I've delayed this for months," he said. "I can't keep waiting forever." The father lowered his head. "I'll catch up soon." The word sounded sincere. But sincerity couldn't erase unpaid bills. One by one, the family's belongings were carried onto the sidewalk. The youngest child hugged a stuffed animal without fully understanding why home suddenly existed outside instead of inside. Daniel stood frozen. It wasn't simply the eviction that disturbed him. It was how ordinary the family looked. They weren't irresponsible strangers. They looked exactly like the people he worked beside every day. Exactly like the people standing at the bus stop every morning. Exactly like him. A quiet thought entered his mind. If nothing changes, how many years until that's me? The walk home felt longer than usual. Not because of the distance. Because denial had finally become impossible. That night, Daniel didn't blame his employer. He didn't blame inflation. He didn't blame luck. Instead, he opened his banking app and scrolled through the previous month's transactions. Meal deliveries. Entertainment. Impulse purchases. Monthly subscriptions he barely remembered signing up for. Small expenses. Dozens of them. Each one had seemed insignificant. Together they told a completely different story. His paycheck hadn't disappeared overnight. It had leaked away, one unnoticed decision at a time. That realization was uncomfortable. But it was also strangely freeing. Because if his choices had created the pattern, perhaps different choices could create a different future. The following Saturday, instead of sleeping until noon, Daniel visited the public library. He hadn't entered one in years. Rows of shelves stretched farther than he expected. Thousands of ideas quietly waiting for someone willing to listen. He wandered without any clear destination until a single title caught his attention. It wasn't flashy. It didn't promise overnight wealth. It simply explored how ordinary people built financial stability through ordinary habits. That honesty caught his attention. Most success stories focused on extraordinary opportunities. This one focused on everyday decisions. Daniel checked out the book and spent the rest of the weekend reading. One sentence refused to leave his mind. Financial freedom isn't usually destroyed by one terrible decision. It's slowly postponed by hundreds of comfortable ones. He closed the book. Not because he disagreed. Because it described his life with uncomfortable accuracy. The next payday arrived. So did the invitations. "We're all meeting after work. You coming? You've earned it." Daniel looked at the messages for a long moment. A month earlier he would have answered immediately. This time he typed something different. "Maybe next time." His friends filled the chat with laughing emojis. One even joked that he had suddenly become boring. Daniel smiled. Perhaps. But he had grown tired of exciting weekends followed by stressful Mondays. That evening, he walked past the restaurant where he normally spent too much money. He kept walking. At home he cooked a simple dinner. Nothing special. Nothing worth posting online. Yet something unexpected happened. He enjoyed it. Not because the food tasted extraordinary. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't borrowing happiness from tomorrow. The following morning he bought an inexpensive notebook. Its pages were blank. Its cover was plain. But it became the most valuable purchase he made all year. On the first page he wrote 4 simple headings: needs, goals, savings, choices. Every expense had to belong somewhere. If it belonged nowhere, it probably didn't deserve his money. The system wasn't complicated. The challenge wasn't understanding it. The challenge was following it when emotions tried to take control. The first few weeks tested him constantly. Advertisements promised instant satisfaction. Friends continued spending without hesitation. Co-workers laughed whenever someone suggested saving money. You can't save your way to success. Maybe not. But Daniel realized something important. You can absolutely spend your way into permanent struggle. That thought changed how he viewed temptation. Every unnecessary purchase stopped looking like a reward. It started looking like a trade. Temporary excitement for future freedom. Every decision carried a hidden price tag. The question became simple. Is this worth exchanging a piece of my future for? Sometimes the answer was yes. More often, it wasn't. Months passed. The progress was almost invisible. His savings account grew so slowly it often felt meaningless. There were moments he wondered whether any of this effort mattered. Then unexpected expenses arrived. A medical bill. A repair. A transportation problem. For the first time in his adult life, he handled them without panic. No desperate borrowing. No pleading for extra time. No sleepless nights. The emergency still hurt. But it didn't break him. That was the moment Daniel understood something most people overlook. Financial progress isn't measured only by what you can buy. Sometimes it's measured by what no longer has the power to destroy your peace. His co-workers noticed subtle differences. Daniel no longer complained every afternoon. He wasn't magically happier. He simply carried less financial anxiety. During lunch breaks, while others argued about rising prices, he quietly read another chapter from whichever book he had borrowed that week. Someone eventually asked, "Do you really think books are going to make you rich?" Daniel looked up and smiled. "I don't know." He paused. "But I know repeating the same habits never will." The conversation ended there. But inside, another chapter of his life had just begun. People often imagine that transformation arrives with a dramatic breakthrough. A promotion. A winning investment. A brilliant business idea. Daniel discovered something far less exciting. Real change usually arrives disguised as repetition. The same alarm. The same job. The same bus. The same paycheck. The only difference was the person making the decisions. As the months turned into years, discipline stopped feeling like discipline. It became normal. Preparing meals at home no longer felt like a sacrifice. Tracking expenses no longer felt like work. Saving before spending no longer required willpower. His habits had quietly become his identity. And identity is powerful. When behavior becomes part of who you believe you are, it stops feeling like something you force yourself to do. It becomes the obvious choice. Daniel also made another change. Instead of spending every evening recovering from work, he dedicated 1 hour to learning. Not because someone demanded it. Because he realized that the person earning tomorrow's income had to be wiser than the person earning today's. Some nights he studied personal finance. Other nights he learned about sales, marketing, negotiation, and small business management. At first, everything felt overwhelming. There were unfamiliar words. Complex ideas. Mistakes that made him question whether he was wasting his time. But every chapter taught him something the classroom never had. Knowledge compounds the same way money does. A little today. A little tomorrow. Eventually, the difference becomes impossible to ignore. One weekend, Daniel noticed something while helping a neighbor repair old furniture. People in the neighborhood often threw away perfectly usable tables and chairs simply because they looked worn. He wondered if they could be restored and resold. The idea wasn't revolutionary. It wasn't glamorous. But it was realistic. He started with one second-hand table. After sanding it, repainting it, and replacing a few damaged parts, he sold it for a modest profit. The amount wasn't impressive. But the lesson was priceless. For the first time, money had come from solving a problem instead of trading hours for wages. That feeling changed everything. He didn't quit his warehouse job. He didn't announce that he had become an entrepreneur. He simply repeated the process. One piece of furniture became 3. 3 became 10. Some weekends he earned almost nothing. Other weekends a customer bought everything he had prepared. Progress was inconsistent. His commitment wasn't. Whenever frustration appeared, he remembered the rainy evening outside the cafe and the family forced to leave their apartment. Those memories reminded him why he had started. Not to become rich overnight. To become free, one decision at a time. Eventually, his savings reached a point that had once seemed impossible. Instead of celebrating with expensive purchases, Daniel made another quiet decision. He invested in a small workshop where he could restore furniture more efficiently. Friends questioned his choice. "You've worked this hard and that's what you're buying?" Daniel smiled. "They see an old building. I see a machine that can create future income." That difference in perspective separated his present from his past. Years continued to pass. His warehouse paycheck was no longer his only source of income. The workshop began supporting itself. Then it began supporting him. Later, he hired someone to help. Then another. Slowly, almost unnoticed, the business that had started with a single worn-out table became a respected local company. The success wasn't explosive. It was steady. And steady success has something spectacular success often lacks. It lasts. One quiet afternoon, Daniel drove through the neighborhood where he had once rented his tiny apartment. The streets looked almost unchanged. The grocery store still stood on the corner. Children still played outside. The same bus stop still filled every morning. He parked for a moment and simply looked around. Not with pride. With gratitude. Years earlier, those streets had represented survival. Now they reminded him of the person he used to be. A young man convinced that earning more was the answer. He finally understood that the biggest raise he had ever received wasn't from an employer. It came from changing the way he thought. Soon afterward, Daniel purchased his first home. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't featured in magazines. It was comfortable. Warm. Secure. The first evening he sat alone in the empty living room without turning on the lights. Silence filled the house. Memories filled his mind. The empty refrigerator. The sleepless nights. The anxiety before payday. The fear of unexpected bills. He realized something remarkable. Those struggles had not disappeared because life became easier. They disappeared because he had become stronger. A few days later, his father visited for the first time. He walked slowly through each room, running his hand across the walls as though making sure they were real. Finally he looked at Daniel. "I used to worry about you," he admitted quietly. "I thought you'd spend your whole life chasing the next paycheck." Daniel smiled. So did I. Neither of them spoke again for several moments. Sometimes the deepest conversations happen in complete silence. As the years passed, younger workers often asked Daniel for advice. They expected him to reveal secret investments. Hidden opportunities. Shortcuts. Instead, he usually asked them a simple question. "What happens to your money during the first week after payday?" Most people laughed. Then they stopped laughing. Because they already knew the answer. Daniel would smile and say, "Your future isn't built on payday. It's built on every ordinary day that follows." Many people spend years waiting for the perfect opportunity. The perfect salary. The perfect economy. The perfect moment to finally take control. But life rarely changes all at once. It changes quietly. Through choices so small they barely seem important. Cooking one more meal at home. Reading one more chapter. Saving one more percentage. Learning one more skill. Saying, "not today," to one unnecessary purchase. None of those decisions look extraordinary. Together, they can completely redirect a life. So before your next paycheck arrives, ask yourself something that matters far more than how much you'll earn. Ask yourself who will be making the decisions after the money reaches your account. Because income can improve your circumstances. But character determines whether those circumstances last. The distance between surviving and thriving is often measured by habits nobody else ever notices. Your future probably won't begin with a lottery ticket. Or a miracle. Or a perfect opportunity. It may begin with the next ordinary choice you make after reading this. If this story gave you a new perspective, share in the comments. What's one financial habit you're committed to changing this month? Someone reading your answer might begin changing their own life because of it. And if you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that explore the hidden habits, decisions, and mindsets that quietly shape extraordinary lives. Because sometimes, the smallest decision you make today becomes the turning point you'll thank yourself for years from now.